So today we're going to go through a tutorial for a sidekick. We're going to go through the technique of the move, some film study of it being used in competition, and then we're going to go through some common problems that people have with it and potentially some variations to use off the move in sparring and competition. Now, the first thing to address with a sidekick for MMA and kickboxing is that it's generally quite a rare move. I think people who come from martial arts such as Kung Fu, Karate, Taekwondo, that kind of thing, they think of a sidekick as a very standard move that you see often. But when you watch MMA and kickboxing, it is quite a rare move. Now, one bout that changed my perception of this move is a bout featuring Sensei Saw King Star. If you don't know him, then just ask anybody who's knowledgeable about Muay Thai. He's pretty much been the best competitor in the last 15 years. And I'm going to show a few clips in a minute of him just getting routinely tagged by this move. And for my money, if it can work against him, then it can work against anybody in the kickboxing sphere, MMA, anything like that.
So here you see Sensei get tagged over and over again to the body and to the thigh. There is a slight size disadvantage for Sensei here, but it's still going to be very hard for a normal kicker to land on him.
Now, one further point is that bout was a hybrid kickboxing rules bout. So in some of the rules for that, there are no kicks to the knee, whereas in MMA, kicks to the knee are allowed. So you saw in that bout, in some cases, he was targeting the thigh with the side kick. But in MMA, you see John Jones do it. I think Brandon Vera's done it. Some other people, you generally see it, they go for the side kick to the knee. And in my opinion, if it's legal, then you might as well do it because you're in an MMA bout. It's not going to be the nicest environment in the world. They're probably going to have no problems with knocking you out. So in my opinion, the side kick becomes an even greater weapon simply because the rules in MMA, they allow those strikes to the knee. Whereas in kickboxing, there are no strikes to the knee, you can only strike to the thigh. So the technique of the side kick is going to be the knee raises, turn to one side and pivot the foot, and then extend out. This motion of lifting the knee and turning it is known as a chamber. You're chambering the kick. This is the chamber position for the side kick. If we were chambered like this would be a chamber position for the front kick.
When chambering the kick, try and keep the thigh at 90 degrees towards the shin.
So in terms of the pivot foot, I pivot more than 90 degrees generally, sort of about, I would say maybe 120, 130 degrees when doing it. Because if we're lined up here, and then if I'm only pivoted at 90 degrees, then I'm in quite an awkward position there, where my balance isn't very sturdy at all. So if it comes in like this, and then if you just, any kind of weight there, I'm just gonna go straight over. Whereas if I pivot towards around 120, 130 degrees, then I'm in a much more sturdy position here. And if he tries and rushes me, then my balance is just going to be much stronger and I'm going to be able to withstand any kind of force pushing me backwards. So one difference between a front kick and a side kick is that because of the stance issues, generally a front kick can be done more often in competition and sparring just on the spot without any kind of motion, and from that respect it's generally much more of a kind of a counter move, and it can be done in a sort of a more relaxed way, a sort of smoother, slicker way, whereas a side kick has to be done with some kind of movement, because first of all you need to turn to one side first to do it, and then it's generally, that's going to telegraph it and you're going to need to probably glide it in. So a side kick will probably be a bit more like that, where there's some kind of gliding along the stance. Whereas a front kick, you might be a bit more on the spot and just able to kind of stand your ground and just put it in. It's just not going to have the same kind of glide as you will have with a sidekick.
Of course, sometimes sidekicks can be done on the spot as well, standing your ground, but the point that I'm making is a generalization.
So one reason that you don't tend to see as many sidekicks in kickboxing, particularly in kind of the Dutch kickboxing style, is because of the stance. In order to do a sidekick, the easiest way is going to be if you're simply on to one side and you're just going to be firing them off there. However, using this stance for all the other moves, whilst it might be better for the sidekick, it's going to be very bad in terms of defending against right low kicks. And you know, most bouts in kickboxing, they're going to be an orthodox fighter against an orthodox fighter, and probably both competitors' favourite move is going to be their power roundhouse kick and their right low kick to the leg. So from that perspective, if you're here, it's going to make it very hard to block the kicks. Whereas if you're in a more front-on stance, then you're going to be able to block that kick much easier. It is worth bearing in mind that a lot of the time in kickboxing, MMA, and in boxing, that stances are neither going to be completely front-on, nor are they going to be completely side-on. And from that perspective, if you're in a stance that's somewhere a hybrid between a completely front-on stance and a completely side-on stance, then that's probably going to be the stance that you're going to want to use a sidekick from. And generally, if you're in a stance that is slightly slide-on, there are going to be certain benefits to it beyond a sidekick. So one thing that's worth bearing in mind is that you see the sidekick as the most popular kick in Sanda. And if you look at the type of grappling that's involved in Sanda, it's much more similar to the type of grappling that you see in MMA. Whereas the type of grappling that you see in Muay Thai is quite a unique style of grappling. You see it occasionally in MMA, but not as often as you see the Sanda style grappling, where people go in for sort of like single legs, double legs. And I would also say, in my opinion, that in terms of catching kicks and sweeping the leg away or going for a single leg off a roundhouse kick, in my opinion, the competitors in Sanda are actually more efficient at those techniques than some of the competitors in MMA. I think if it was a wrestling match, then most of the guys in MMA would beat the Sanda competitors. But just in terms of those sort of techniques of kicks, I think some of the Sanda competitors are quite practiced and targeted on those moves. One move that can be used effectively in conjunction with a sidekick is a hook kick. And this is going to be effective because at the start of the move, it tends to look like a sidekick. They both kind of start with roughly the same sort of chamber. So if you've been finding a home for your sidekick and your opponent's intimidated by that, then he might say drop his hands or something along those lines, simply to defend himself against the sidekick. And because the hook kick comes up to a different target, generally you're going to be wanting to target the head with the hook kick, then it might catch him off guard. And the hook kick is going to look roughly like this.
So if you're skeptical of the hook kick, this clip shows exactly how much pop you can get out of it if it's well practiced.
One thing that's worth bearing in mind is that if you're unsure if a sidekick is going to be worth a time investment compared to working on other things, then a hook kick is going to be even more controversial because it's going to take a decent amount of time to get enough pop into that hook kick. You're going to need to use it a lot on the bag and the pads and things that you have in the gym, the paddle, just to train that power to make an effective technique that's going to be worthwhile. But in terms of using it with a sidekick, just because of the trajectory of the two moves and how they look at the start of the move, it can work in conjunction with a sidekick quite effectively if you have decided to incorporate a sidekick into your arsenal.
So that concludes my tutorial. Thank you for watching.